All right, awesome. All right, thank you everyone for sticking around and joining me today. My name is Cecil Phillip. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. Very similar to Jeremy, like what we do is we spend a lot of time helping developers and aspiring developers, make sure they have a good time and a great experience, building on our tools, using our stuff, giving them any type of support that we can. What I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about is what I like to call like real world.NET, right? Like, so we're going to take a look really quickly at some of the things that .NET can do. We can take a look at some of the things that have been built with .NET. And then also we'll have a little bit of Q&A happening. This is a lightning talk, so it's not going to be as long as some of the other ones, but hopefully you'll be able to get some good information out of it. Now, because I am going to be talking about .NET, this is going to be a little bit of a roll-up of what you saw Jeremy and Scott spoke about previously. So we're going to talk about .NET Core and Razor and like some of these other like cool things. If you want to, you could reach out to me on Twitter. You could see I'm at Cecil Phillip. If you look at the slide there, you can see what my handle is. And again, feel free at any point in time to send me a message or a follow or, ask for any time that you need any assistance. Okay, so let's get going. So first I want to start talking about like .NET Core 2. Like what was the main focus there? Right, and in the .NET Core 2 era, the goal was really to build something that was great for building web and cloud applications. Right, we wanted something that was very lightweight, something that was very scalable, and it's something also that was obviously cross-platform. Right? Because if you think about the nature of the web, like the web runs everywhere. And so we want to be able to write applications that can not only scale well, but also we want to be able to have choice. And the choice to whether I want to deploy on Linux or Mac, or if I want to deploy on an IoT device or something like that. Right? And so some of those are some of the really good things that we got from .NET Core 2. Now, earlier this year, like we released .NET Core 3. And along with that release, we had tons of other what we like to call workloads, right? Like tons of other areas of focus that we added to the framework. So desktop was one thing that was missing from .NET Core 2 that was added. So now you have the ability to, build UWP applications, or you could build Windows Forms applications if you have those. If you have existing Windows Forms applications, actually, you could, with a little bit of work, you could bring them over to .NET Core and make use of some of the performance benefits, some of the, enhanced language support and some of these types of things. Also, IoT is another thing that's been added, right? So again, we have support for running on ARM architectures. And even coming pretty soon, and something that we have in preview today, is a collection of APIs, a collection of .NET Core IoT APIs. So now that you can actually write code in .NET that'll target particular architectures like Raspberry Pis and those types of things. And then the last piece that we added to that in that .NET Core 3 wave of supported scenarios was the ability for us to run AI, right? Like AI is a huge thing, right? And we see it and we hear about it everywhere, right? Like every time you take a picture and you make a young person look old, or you add like, glasses to a person's face, or you do anything with like AR, VR on your applications, a lot of that is using the power of AI. And, we need to be able to recognize faces and items and different objects inside of images and video. Well, now that we have the ability, using something called ML.NET, we can now create AI models, we can trade AI models, we can consume them in our applications as well, right? So now, we have the ability to essentially build almost anything that we wanted to using .NET Core. And again, like I mentioned before, like here's some of the major themes that were covered in .NET Core 3. Right, so we talk about like desktop workloads and the UI in and around. In .NET Core 2 and in your previous versions, we weren't able to write applications that ran specifically on Windows, like UWP applications or Windows Form applications, because these were very specific to Windows. They were very much reliant on things that were tied closely to that operating system, and they still are today. But now, you have the ability to add these types of applications to your .NET Core projects. Now, one of the things that I like to tell people is that even though we can build desktop applications now with .NET Core 3, that doesn't mean that these particular frameworks that we support today are cross-platform. So what does that mean? It means no, you can't run Windows Forms applications on Linux. No, you can't run WPF applications on Mac. But again, like you could really make use of some of those cool features of .NET Core 3 to make sure that, again, like your applications are as small as possible, to make sure that they're as performant as possible, and to make sure that you can leverage some of the new things like C#8 and other things like we'll see in a little bit. Another thing that we spoke about, again, machine learning with ML.NET, and we'll have a whole set of slides and stuff like that that'll talk about it. But within the box, we have the ability to support all these different types of machine learning algorithms and patterns and procedures. Right? Like you create various machine learning pipelines. You can run different things like classifications or linear regressions using machine learning inside of .NET Core. Another thing that I think that is great too is you also have a really interesting story where we can interrupt between different machine learning techniques, right? So if you're working with TensorFlow, if you're working with something like PyTorch or something like that, we could still consume those models and use them inside of your application. So if you're running a web app or a mobile app, and maybe you don't want to train the model, but you just want to consume it and make use of some of its machine learning and intelligent capabilities, you can add those to your software as well. And obviously too, the world of microservices and web development has always been core, and we added some new really interesting features there as well. Now, just about, I want to say in November, we released .NET Core 3.1. What's really interesting about 3.1 is this is what is called our LTS release. The LTS stands for long-term support. So that means from November 2019 and up for the next 3 years, like this is going to be a supported version of .NET Core, right? And when I mean supported, it means that it's always going to get updates. You're always going to be able to call support. You're always going to be able to call somebody on the phone to report issues and problems and those types of things. This is a little bit different to our intermediary releases that happen in between. Because usually what happens is that like in the intermediary releases, once the next version comes out, I think you have maybe like 2 or 3 months before, like that one becomes out of support, right? So like those ones have a shorter life cycle in terms of how long we're gonna do patches and updates and those types of things. So if you have a company that is, you can't update as quickly as you'd like to, or, you're on a little bit of a slower cadence in terms of, making changes to your underlying infrastructure, like this might be important for you to know, right? So you could take your time and know for a fact that if I stick to .NET Core 3.1, that I have at least 3 years of support that they'll be able to take care of. Okay, so moving forward. So we spoke a little bit about the desktop story there. And one of the things that was, I guess, kind of missing was, .NET Core from the beginning has always been an open source framework. That means that you can go on GitHub and you can look at the code. You can clone the repo and build it on your machine. You can submit issues, or you could do pull requests or any of these types of things and start to participate in the community, which is really important. It actually turns out that there's been a huge amount of folks that are contributing to the .NET Core runtime, to the ASP.NET libraries, and to all these other things. And it's always great when you have like the community coming together and participating, because now we have this wider share of thought leaders and perspectives that are influencing the way that the product is being made, and now it's being made better for everyone. But now, again, like I said before, going back over into .NET Core 2, it was really focused on web and cloud. So we really never had open source versions of these desktop frameworks. So now what we do is in .NET Core 3 and going forward, they open source the WinForms code, and also the Windows WPF code and the UWP code, and also the Windows UI Xamarin library. So there's tons of controls, there's tons of all of the underlying infrastructure that makes those things work are now completely open source. And again, you can head over to the .NET repo that's located on GitHub, and you can check a lot of those out. So let's take a look really quickly to some of the features that were added to C#, and some of the features that you use today that I think are really interesting. So C#8, like I mentioned, was released with .NET Core 3. And what you're seeing here is a really small snippet of code, but it has so many features that are highlighted in there. And some of these features are actually started from C#7, and then now we've added some additional ones in 8.0. The first one that you see here that might be very obvious to you is the fact that we can now do async main, right? Which is something that we never had before, right? So your main function, if you recall, is the thing that starts the application, right? It's the entry point into what lets the .NET runtime know this is how our program runs, right? Like this is where everything begins. So previously we supported async void, and that's been the case ever since the beginning of .NET. But now we have the ability to do async main, which is really cool too. So that means that I could use like async await within my main method. One of the features that we added here in C#8 was the ability to use ranges. So if you take a look at that far right side of the screen, you notice that there's a 2 and the number 2 and like 2 little dots, right? So that means that now we could do things like, hey, give me like a subsection of a list or an array using this really succinct syntax, right? Which is really cool. We have nullable reference types, which was a huge feature. And it's one of those things that help us catch a lot of those null reference exception errors and let us be a little bit more expressive about what the intent of our code is, right? So if something is expected to be null or not expected to be null, you could specify that using those question marks that are there and also turning on the nullability feature. One of the things that scared a lot of folks was, oh, well, does that mean that whenever I upgrade to C#8 that this thing is just going to start freaking out and saying that I have errors because I haven't marked my code as being nullable or not? Well, no, that's not the case. This is very much of an opt-in feature, right? So you could turn on this feature on a per file level, you could turn it on a per project level, or you could even use like regions and even just have like sections of your code checked for it. So again, I definitely recommend you check it out. It's a really good way to catch errors inside of your apps. Now, one of my favorite features actually happens to be async streams. Async streams is a way that allows you to essentially do pull-based iteration, right? So as I'm looping over lists of things, right? But maybe every time I go over that loop, it's making like an asynchronous call. It's calling a web service, or it's reaching out to this to do some I/O, right? And generally, like those are blocking operations. But now we could do it in a way inside of the language that we could create these loops that are essentially asynchronous, which again, if you're familiar with async await, they're a way to free up the processor to not let us, tie up the resources for long-running operations. And essentially, we get the perception of better performance. Again, we also have switch expressions, was another cool feature, which I think when tied with pattern matching, makes it really easy and really succinct for us to do like these conditional selections inside of our code. We also added these recursive patterns that are there. And listen, like there's tons of other features in C#8 that we added. Some of these you might use every day and some of these you might use once in a while. But I definitely recommend you check it out to make sure that you see exactly what's inside of it. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to talk really quickly about desktop support. Again, like I mentioned before, not only was the desktop APIs made open source, and not only were they moved over into .NET Core, but there are tons of enhancements that were made too, right? Like now we have a ton of XAML controls that are available. We have high DPI support. So that means if you have displays that are high density displays, it means that your controls and your application are going to show correctly and properly. We have the UWP browser controls and new media controls. So if you want to embed a web browser into your application, you can do that in using like some of the newer web technologies. And you can also have controls for like, playing video and images and those types of things that have been updated to support newer formats. Now, one of the reasons that folks, one of the things that folks always ask me is, why do I care about desktop on .NET Core, right? Because, well, .NET Core means I could be cross-platform and it means I could have a smaller runtime. But if the desktop stuff only still runs on Windows, well, why would I do that? And why would I care about it? So outside of the nature of it being cross-platform and open source, there's tons of benefits that you get out of moving over to .NET Core. So for instance, you have the ability to deploy what we like to call side-by-side. So that means that you can have multiple versions of .NET Core on a machine, And each application could just focus on that particular version. Where if you think about the .NET framework timeline, generally you'd have the .NET framework on the machine, and every application on your machine would have to use that version of the framework. Right? With .NET Core, I could have a 2.0 application and a 2.2 application and a 3 application and a 3.1 application. And all these different runtimes on my machine, leveraging different features of .NET Core. And I won't have to worry about them like butting heads with each other, which is great. We also have the ability to, .NET Core is a very play-by-play or pay-for-play type framework. So that means that as I deploy my application, I don't have to bring along the entire framework with me, like we would have in .NET framework. So, today I wouldn't have to bring in like WCF and WF, Windows, what's that called? Windows Workflow Foundation or any of those types of things. I'd only bring along the pieces that I need. So that means that my application is smaller. It means that it's more performant. And, even though it still runs on Windows, we could still leverage the benefits of, making use of some of the newer language features in C# or, some of the performance enhancements that are inside of the .NET Core runtime. All right. Now, some other things that we have, obviously ASP.NET Core 3 added features like gRPC, which is really interesting. Right? gRPC is essentially a methodology for us to do high performance RPC calls, right? Remote procedure calls. Very similar to how we used to have with WCF. With gRPC, one of the great things is that it's very performant because it uses a binary protocol. So it's very compressed. The message sizes are very small. I think it uses HTTP2 is one of the requirements there. But the message sending and sizes are very small and performance too. So it's a really good option if you want to do, again, like a lot of high scale messaging in between like your different microservices or your different applications that you have running in your infrastructure. We also added the worker service, and Scott mentioned some of these things before, right? The worker service and Razor components and web APIs, right? With the web API front too, right now we have Identity Server out of the box. If you ever heard about Identity Server, it is what we like to call an OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect compliant server that'll let you, generate web tokens and do federated identity, centralized federated identity to your applications. And right now we have support for that in the box, specifically for authenticating web APIs and SPAs. So Jeremy spoke a little bit about Blazor before. This might be an option for you if you're creating web APIs that need identity and you need Blazor to talk to them. This might be an option there for doing identity with those types of things. And again, like we did speak about Blazor before, and Jeremy spoke about that in depth. But again, just to rehash, Blazor is a thing that runs on WebAssembly, and we can either do it on the server or we can do it on the client if you want to. Maybe sometime in the future, you might be able to see us be able to move from one to the other without too much work at all. But it gives you really great performance for creating SPA-like interactivity inside of web applications, which make it really great for your users. All right, and then we can't talk about the web without talking about microservices, since a lot of microservices today are built using HTTP, and you can make use of that thing we showed a little while ago called the worker service. And inside of that, essentially, it's a console app, but this console app, essentially is enhanced with a lot of the cool features from ASP.NET Core, like logging support, centralized dependency injection, configuration, and all these types of things. And now you could, pull these up and put them together to create like these little pockets of services that could all talk to each other and they can scale independently to create a really great application experience. And then also too, we have ML.NET, like I mentioned before, right? ML.NET being the thing that we could use to create machine learning models and consume machine learning models inside of .NET. This is also another open source framework, and you can go over to github.com/.NET/machine learning. And right there, you'll see tons of samples, you'll see all of the code. Again, it's open source. You could submit pull requests or ask questions right there, right inside of the repo. The team is very responsive to feedback. One of the great things I love about ML.NET is that it always took what I like to call a very scenario-focused approach. right? So it's not, hey, I don't know ML.NET, and then now I got to learn all of these different machine learning terminologies and algorithms and features when maybe I really just want to identify a person in a picture, or maybe I just want to say, hey, well, I just want to do like some basic sentiment analysis, which means, hey, is this a good comment or is this a bad comment? Does somebody like this webcast or somebody doesn't like this webcast? And being able to determine those types of things, right? And so now if, with ML.NET, you can take the approach of saying, hey, well, this is what I'd love to do. Let me see how I could do that, right? And you could start from the top and work your way down to the bottom. So you could get as detailed as you wanted to, or if you could, you could get as very lightweight as you wanted to. And also, Scott showed, I want to just put this out really quickly. There's tons of folks that are using .NET today. .NET is over 20 years old, and it has a history of being mature, robust. It's being able to evolve over time, which I think is extremely important. Obviously it has the support of Microsoft and the .NET team, but also the .NET community, because I keep saying this, it's open source, right? And so now we have all these folks that are working on the framework and testing it and building it and creating tons of interesting things there with it. If you've ever heard about folks like UPS or Jet.com, that was recently bought by Walmart, right? Which is really cool, right? We have .NET startups that are being purchased by big companies because of how great their software is. Folks like National Instruments that build those little graphing calculators and things of that nature. All of these folks are here like using .NET. Also, Static Overflow might be someone that's very interesting to you as well. These folks have been around for years. Again, Scott talked a little bit about this before, but these folks have been here showing us how to, helping us answer questions and those types of things online. Now, while we're here, I actually want to take a look and show you some other applications that are using .NET that you may not have known about. Now, personally, as you can imagine, I use .NET as well. And I have an application here that I built with my buddy Burke called the URL list. And this application runs completely serverlessly. So when we think about serverless applications and running applications in the cloud, that means that I don't really have to worry about provisioning machinery. I don't have to worry about setting up networks or doing backups or any of these types of things. I just have to write code and I publish it. And then the runtime or the cloud is going to do this for me. Now this one just happens to be running on Azure Functions. And then the storage mechanism for the HTML and the CSS is all in blob storage. So again, so that means that at no point in time do I have to worry about provisioning servers. And then it's running .NET in the background, which is fantastic. Another app that runs .NET actually, or another public website, is Channel 9. So this is channel9.msdn.com. This essentially is where we host a lot of our developer videos, a lot of our developer content around video. And you can come in, you can see tons of different shows and learn about a lot of stuff that we're doing here at Microsoft. You can learn about C# language features and all this types of stuff. But this entire website is running on .NET, which is, again, another great example. And then the last one I'll show you is here, there's the .NET website itself. The .NET website runs .NET, right? And actually, if you come to the website and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see it says here, powered by .NET Core 3.1. This is already running on the latest version of .NET, right? And I'll tell you, like, this site gets millions and millions of hits. So, it's very important for it to be robust. It's very important for the underlying infrastructure of it to run. It's very important for us to be able to react to change very quickly if we need to inside of our code base. So again, here's just some examples of things that are running .NET that I definitely recommend that folks check out. I'm going to come back over to my screen really quickly. So again, Scott mentioned .NET 5. That's going to be coming sometime in preview sometime in 2020. So definitely look forward for that. That's going to be a merger of all of the different .NETs that we have. So you can imagine there's going to be tons of features and stuff like that that are there for you to check out. But I'm going to stop there because I think I've definitely gone over a little bit. But let me know if there's any questions anyone has. Let me know if there's anything that you want to talk about. Let me know if this was useful for you. I hope it was. And thank you all for taking some time to listen to it.
Okay, thanks, Cecil. So
Sure.
we have two questions. So which one is best, ADO.NET or Entity Framework?
Which is best, ADO.NET or Entity Framework? So Entity Framework actually builds on top of ADO.NET. So it's not a one versus the other type scenario. Uh, it's very much of a, you know, what's, I like to say like like how much control do you want to have, right? So look at it this way. Like I can write a website by scratch and write all the HTML myself, or I could use a template engine and have it generate some of that code for me, right? Versus, right, I could use ADO.NET and I could, write all the scripts myself. I could create all my objects myself. I'm going to be responsible for executing the queries and handling transient errors and doing a lot of that stuff by myself. Or I could go over and I could make use of Entity Framework that's going to do some of that work for me. So again, me personally, like as machines are getting faster, as compute is getting more widely available for folks, I usually try to lean towards lean towards Entity Framework, just because it does a lot of that stuff for me. And I personally, I don't really want to think too much about writing SQL a lot of the time. But again, if you have very specific scenarios that you want to be very focused on performance, I definitely say you'd want to stick with ADO, like raw ADO.NET SQL connection.
Okay, so there is another question. How can I create prototype methods like JavaScript in C#.NET?
How can you create prototype methods
Yeah.
like in JavaScript? Okay, so I'm guessing the question is asking. So I know JavaScript has a prototype property where you could just append on additional things to it. Like in C#, we have this thing called extension methods. And so if you want to do something like extension methods to dynamically add new things to C#, you can do something like that. I'm hoping that's the question he's asking, but that's what I understand it to be.
Okay, sure. So I have one question that you told about the ML machine learning. So right now, with the help of Python, more developers are building the machine learning methods or their
Yeah.
application. So why to go with .NET? Why not to go with Python?
I get this question a lot. I think there's nothing wrong with going with Python. I think if you have a team that is a team of .NET developers, then essentially you'd be asking them to learn another language and to learn another framework and to learn another sets of tools, right? It's kind of like saying, well, hey, well, if I know .NET, like, why would I go to JavaScript to build like something in Node.js? Or, if I know Java, like, why would I go to .NET, right? Like the thing is, like, you'll always get to see an ecosystem where folks want to use the language that they know to build, to be more productive. That being said, it's very fine to use them together, right? We could use Python and .NET together from the perspective of you can train your model in Python. Maybe you do have some folks that already know Python really well. You can train your model in Python. You can consume it in .NET, and that's totally fine. So maybe your data analysis and your analytics code is in Python and it lives somewhere, and maybe you have like your desktop application or your Xamarin application or your ASP.NET application lives somewhere else. And you could export the Python models and use them in .NET as well. So I mean, it's totally fine. But the only reason that you choose one between the other, for me, would really be one, you have some folks that are more knowledgeable about Python than others, or if you have like particular libraries in Python that are not in .NET that you want to make use of.
Okay, that's nice. So what to go with Python plus the .NET Core?
Yeah, it's
That
totally fine to use them both.
Yeah, okay. And what type of application can be made with .NET Core? Just like there are lots of projects, just like e-commerce site, hospital site, yeah, and
Yeah.
any travel agency site. So which application is best for the .NET Core, or overall application is best for the .NET Core projects?
I mean, you can essentially build anything with .NET Core. So like .NET is a very generalized programming environment, right? Like, so if you want to build like high-skilled networking applications, we have great support for that. If you want to build applications like an example of high-scale networking applications would be if you want to do something like stock trading, like, people that need like very real time, not just real time in the browser, but also real time in your backend as well. So .NET has great support for doing those types of things. If you want to build games, .NET has support for things like Unity and Monogame. You can build games with .NET. There's lots of games in the App Store today that you can download on your phone that were built on .NET. A lot of them you might not even know about. I think it might be public, and like, we have a lot of different big companies. I won't call their names because I don't know if I can say that or not, but a lot of big companies that make games use .NET for making games. And obviously websites too. Websites are great for making, for building with .NET, of course.
Okay, sure. And can you say something about the Azure token, something like that? Means how to get the subscription for that, or it is easy for the student to learn Azure?
Yeah, for sure. So Azure is a great place to just get started, particularly if you're building with .NET and using Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. And I say that because like the tooling is already built in for those types of things, right? So, you could download Azure extensions for VS Code and, sign in and just deploy an app to the cloud, and you never have to leave your editor. And same thing with Visual Studio 2019, right? You could download an Azure extension and you never have to leave your editor. You could just write code and check it into GitHub or to Azure DevOps or somewhere and just publish it, which is a great loop for developers. And when I say loop, right, you talk about the loop of, I design something, I build something, I test something, I deploy something, and you keep going around in that circle: design, build, test, deploy, right? So we call that like a developer loop. But it's great when you could stay in your loop and you don't have to come out of your tool to go somewhere else. In terms of how easy it is, like, you can get started for free easily. You can go to azure.com/ you got a free account there. If you want to sign up with your GitHub account, you could do that. If anyone here is a student, we have Azure for Students, which again, very similar. You get free resources if you have like a student email address and can verify you. But I always think that Azure is probably one of the best places to run .NET because we're the folks that made .NET, right? And we have a lot of tools in there for it.
Just little bit. So just now, AWS also support .NET Core application. We can host .NET application in AWS container. And what do you think that means .NET Core application is better to host on AWS or on Azure?
So obviously, I'm going to give you a very biased answer because obviously I work for Microsoft and I work there. I'll tell you that we've been running .NET on Azure from the beginning, right? It's not something that we just added support for. It's not something that we just did. Like, we've been doing it for years. You know what I mean? Like, we've been building .NET longer than we've been building Azure. And then when Azure came out, .NET was the first language that we supported there. So there's a long history and a lot of understanding and a lot of knowledge about what's the best way to run .NET in the cloud. And again, I think not only the fact that we run it well, but going back to what I said before, like, the tools are really rich. So we have lots of extensions and tools that make it very easy for you to publish your app to the cloud without messing around with too many knobs and switches.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So it was nice. Sure. Yeah, thank you, Cecil. So it was nice lightning talks with you. So you talk more on the .NET Core and the infrastructure about it. And thank you for your wonderful time. And yeah, great. And please visit Nepal 2020. So it's an opening, and please do visit Nepal also. Yeah, thank you very much.
Will do. Thank you all for listening. Have a good day.